This was the first season that the team had not gone with the traditional introduction of the entire team at the first home game of the season. The bench created their own huddle in a show of pulling together as a unit. That doesn't sound very good.
That is an unusual way to start a new season. Wow. The crowd got more than they bargained for.
Yeah.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB87, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls and the 1987 NBA season. Now here's your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome back to another episode of NB87. We're up to episode 7 in our series. Welcome to existing listeners and those that are also new to the show. Hello to you, Aaron. Thanks again for being a part of the show, mate.
Adam, imagine, if you will, 30 episodes about Michael Jordan's rookie season and the Bulls' 84-85 season, titled NB85. Then, Adam, imagine, if you will, 6 games from Michael Jordan's rookie season, never released in the trading community before, have just popped up out of nowhere, Adam.
I can imagine, mate. It's incredible stuff. Historically significant. Interesting that this has happened in the last sort of 6 or so months, I guess. These games have just appeared some 32 years after the event. Fascinating stuff. Some milestone moments in terms of Jordan's rookie season. A 45-point effort against the Cavs at Chicago Stadium. There's one on the road against the Lakers, in which Orlando Woolridge hits a big-time basket to secure the Bulls win, as covered in the aforementioned NB85 series too, mate. Some good stuff there. Hopefully they'll appear on YouTube, I guess. It's only a matter of time.
NBA News, Notes and Quotes, January 15th through 29th, 1987.
Houston travelled to Chicago in front of a good crowd, 17,038, and the Rockets had a 107-96 11-point win over the Bulls. Chicago dropped to 18-16 on the year. For the Bulls, Jordan had a fantastic game individually, 43 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists and a couple of steals. Brad Sellers, continuing his good form, had 19 points. Charles Oakley, 14 points and 11 rebounds. And Dave Corzine, 12 boards. And for Houston, Robert Reed led the Rockets with 26 points. Ralph Sampson had 25 points and 14 boards. And Akeem Olajuwon had 20 points and 15 boards. And Dirk Minifield had 13 assists. And I mentioned Dirk specifically because in late September of 84, he signed as a free agent with the Bulls, and we did allude to this back in NB85. He was with the team for just under a month, and he actually had some game time during the exhibition season before being waived. He hopefully is a future guest of the show. Just haven't scheduled a time to chat yet, so we'll see how that goes. But check out our NB85 series, which we're plugging with reckless abandon as we go today. Moving on. The game of the night, though, was at Sacramento, where a great friend of the show, Eddie Johnson, episode 41, nailed a 3-point bucket from the right corner with just 3 seconds left on the clock, and that snapped his Kings 4-game losing skid and simultaneously broke the hearts of the visiting Portland Trailblazers. Kiki Vandeweghe led all scorers with 37 points. And in Phoenix's 123-107 win over the travelling Utah Jazz, UNC Tar Heel great and 6-time NBA All-Star Walter Davis exploded for a career-high 45 points. Good effort there from Walter, getting a career-high. His team took the 16-point win.
Despite the ban of 2 players for cocaine use, the Houston Rockets showed the Bulls why they made the NBA Finals the year before. Lewis Lloyd and Mitchell Wiggins had both been suspended by the NBA for 2 years for breaking the league's substance policy. In the game, Michael Jordan tied the Bulls team record he set in LA on November 28 by putting up a staggering 43 shots to score his 43 points.
Obviously, I hadn't examined the box score in too much depth, given that he took 43 shots to get those 43 points.
MJ also broke a team record for the most amount of ice used to ice his right elbow after the game.
He copped a hiding.
Houston had a 57-48 halftime lead. Then he extended it out to 77-55 on the back of a 20-7 run out of the main break. Then the Bulls got it back to 83-75 on a 20-6 run, sparked by Sellers and Oakley. The Rocket lead was just 4 with 5:36 to go before Akeem Abdul-Olajuwon went to work.
Kevin McHale dropped a would-be equal season high of 38 points in a 133-128 overtime barn burner at Boston Garden, helping his Celtics fight off a great effort from the visiting Cleveland Cavaliers. And in other news, the Santa Fe New Mexican reported that the Dallas Mavericks had their first ever franchise win at Milwaukee in a hard-fought 124-122 overtime win over the Bucks. A James Donaldson jam with 4 seconds left sealed the Mavs win, despite the best efforts from Terry Cummings, great friend of the show, episode 17, who was a monster. He registered 39 points, 15 rebounds, 10 assists, and 6 steals.
Wow.
Incredible stat line there from TC. Mark Aguirre led his Mavs with 27 points. Sam Perkins added 25, and another great friend of the show. It's almost implied, as I do like to say pretty much. Orlando Blackman, episode 70, had 20 points, including 6 in the extra session. Moving on to the 17th, Philadelphia at Chicago in front of a great crowd of 18,222 saw the Bulls have a 105-89 win. So a fantastic effort there from Chicago, holding Philly to just 12 points as a team in the last quarter, and the Bulls improved to 19-16 on the year. For Chicago, Jordan had another monster, 47 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists and 4 steals. Oak had 16 points and 17 boards. Brad Sellers and Earl Curitan, 12 points each, and Johnny Paxson, 10 points. For the Sixers, Barkley had 21 points and 13 rebounds, Cliff Robinson, 14 points, and Maurice Cheeks had 13 points and 6 assists.
Pre-game, Charles Barkley said he didn't want to be embarrassed by Jordan scoring a lot of points and that he would break him into pieces before letting him score his season average of 37. Even post-game, Barkley wasn't ready to concede in saying that there was no contest between MJ and Dr. J, in that the Doctor was the greatest athlete to ever play the game.
Wow, okay. That's an interesting call because this is early 1987 and obviously Dr. J's last season. We've got a third-year Michael Jordan. Obviously, rose-coloured glasses there, I guess, from Sir Charles. Not to say that Doc wasn't phenomenal.
In the game, the Bulls outscored Philly 26-11 to finish the game, with Jordan scoring 14 in the fourth by himself. Jordan went through Irving, Welby, Free, David Wingate, and Maurice Cheeks like a hot knife through butter, as none of the four could keep him in check. Again, Jordan's teammates assisted ably down the stretch, with the Sixers concentrating on Jordan. Paxson hit key shots, and Oakley gave the Bulls a 16-6 rebounding edge in the fourth term alone. Post-game, Julius Erving wondered how a higher-powered offense like Philadelphia's could be held to just 89 points. It helped that the Bulls were one of the better defensive teams in the NBA at the time.
You mentioned there how Jordan's teammates assisted ably down the stretch. How many points did Abley get? I didn't actually look at the box score in that much depth. Just 4 games were played on this date. We're talking about the 18th, by the way. The smallest margin of victory was 9 points. Milwaukee were 100-91 winners over the visiting Atlanta Hawks.
On January 19, it was reported in the Tribune that Michael Jordan took some time out to speak to Diane Sawyer from 60 Minutes at the multiplex, and Bob Sakamoto spoke of how all a group of Japanese tourists wanted to see was not Sears Tower or the Hancock Building, but Air Jordan himself. Such was MJ's popularity.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
60 Minutes executive producer Don Hewitt was a big sports fan who was fascinated by Jordan and the clean-cut image that he portrayed. 60-minute producer Bill Brown wondered if there was anything wrong about Jordan and discovered a young man at ease with his destiny and comfortable with his role in life who was unaffected by fame and fortune.
I like those little tidbits, mate. Thanks for sharing those. Now, on the same date, Chicago visited Indiana in front of 14,754, and the Pacers were 14-point winners, 109-95. Chicago dropped to 19-17 on the year. For the Bulls, Jordan was the leading man again, 32 points, 6 rebounds and 3 assists. Charles Oakley had a great game with 28 points and 18 rebounds, and Brad Sellers continued his fine form with 15 points and 8 rebounds. And for Indiana, Chuck Person, 27 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists and 6 steals. Great effort there from him. John Long had 25 points. Herb Williams also had 25 points and 9 rebounds. And Steve the Swinger Stepanovic, mate, makes a cameo with 12 points and 15 rebounds. Now, in another game at New Jersey, Magic Johnson dropped 42 points on the Nets, 22 of which came in the third quarter, leading his LA Lakers to a 126-115 win. It was the sixth straight loss for the Nets, whilst the Lakers improved their league best record to 30-8.
When these Bulls get out of sync, they go all the way, wrote Bob Sakamoto. The game actually started 2 hours earlier in order to draw a larger crowd to Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday observance. How about that?
That's cool, yeah, good stuff.
The game also started with only one referee, and Bulls TV man Johnny Kerr was caught in a snowstorm 100 miles away in, now, pardon my pronunciation here if I butcher it, Rensselaer?
Maybe we'll get a good listener of the show, John Boland. John, if you're listening to this, mate, please help us out. How do you pronounce that place?
Anyway, in Indiana whilst he was driving to the game. Aaron then went to the Wikipedia page for the aforementioned town in Indiana and tried to add this little tidbit to the Wikipedia page before someone deleted it.
So someone has since taken that away from you?
Yes.
Wow. Who would do that? Those mean wiki editors.
Extraordinary.
That's crazy. What, they don't agree? Or they just don't want someone else to add any information? Or
obviously, it's a very proud resident of good old R-Town, and they didn't feel as though that the tidbit was worthy, perhaps.
No, they mustn't have.
Anyway, back to the game. Charles Oakley's 28 points in an 18-rebound game had its shine removed by 9 turnovers by the second-year forward. Meanwhile, Pacer rookie Chuck Connors-Person scored 17 points in the game's final 9 minutes. As the top rebounding team in the NBA, the Bulls got smacked on the boards by the Pacers and were also outscored 37-4 in bench points.
That's absolutely brutal.
That's a smacking.
Yeah, that is a smacking. Now, on the 20th of January, Milwaukee travelled to Chicago in front of a pretty lowly crowd, really, given that they're only an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum away, by bus, that is, recalling my one trip to Milwaukee back in 1994. 13,674 fans, so far from a sellout. The Bulls had a 13-point win, 103-90. The fact I went to Milwaukee has nothing to do with this recap whatsoever. The Bulls improved to 20-17 on the year. For Chicago, Jordan had 31 points, 7 boards and a couple of assists. Gene Maximum Security Banks, 18 points. Oak had 14 points, 10 boards and 1 assist shy of a triple-double. Brad Sellers had 10 points and 11 boards, and Johnny Paxson added 10 points. For Milwaukee, Terry Cummings, 27 points and 7 boards. Another great friend of the show, Ricky Pierce, episode 28, had 17 points and 6 boards. John Lucas, recently a new member of the Milwaukee Bucks, had 14 points and 7 rebounds. And future Chicago Bull Craig Hodges had 12 points. There was only one other game on this date. Hometown Sacramento defeated Golden State 123-114, thanks largely to Rush Street Reggie and his 31 points there from Mr. Theus.
The 4 stitches in MJ's lip from a Ricky Pierce elbow signified the brutality of this game.
No longer friend of the show, Ricky Pierce. Sorry about that. Moving on.
Just like that, Ricky's out.
Nah, just kidding. G'day to Ricky if you're listening.
Jordan was made to pay for his team leading 31 points after also landing heavily, hurting his hip and wrist in the process.
Shades of the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals, mate. Game 1 at Detroit. We haven't even got there yet. That's NB90 spoilers.
The bad boy Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, the bad Bucks.
Bucks coach and resident defensive guru Don Nelson has a standing rule that requires his players to bump any unauthorized entry into the lane. Hopefully that's just the opposition talking about his own players. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Gene Banks was fighting the lingering effects of the flu, which forced him to miss the previous game in Indiana to contribute 14 of his 18 points in the second half. Post-game, River said that the flu was still with him. Normally, after the game, he would go out dancing, but tonight I'm going home to bed.
You can always take that to the banks, that you'll get a good quote from Gene post-game. Philadelphia prevailed 129-123 in overtime, but the 76ers had to endure, yeah, you guessed it, great friend of the show, Dale Ellis, and his 40-point explosion, episode 57 of the show. This would be the first of 5 games that Dale would torch a team for 40 or more during this 86-87 campaign.
On January 22nd, the headline, Jordan shows magic in All-Star voting. The story by Bob Sakamoto. Jordan breaks Magic Johnson's record for most votes in All-Star history. Jordan's first half to the NBA season was one for the ages, with an average of 37.7 points per game and 9 straight 40-point outings. He has scored 40 in more than half of the Bulls' games thus far and has twice dropped 50.
Staggering stuff, isn't it?
Remarkable numbers, that's for sure. John Paxson added that if Jordan weren't the person that he was, it would be hard to like him as much as people do. And I quote, "He's so genuine, I'm sure he gets tired, but he never lets it out, and he always has a smile for the next person," end quote.
Now, according to newspaper reports, MJ received 1,141,733 votes, breaking Magic Johnson's 86 record-setting mark of 1,060,892. And just over 3.2 million votes were cast for the 1987 Classic, an increase of almost 200,000 from the previous year.
In Bulls off-court news, Director of Marketing Dave Rosengard was fired from his position. Owner Jerry Reinsdorf called it an amicable parting of the ways. The firing took Rosengard and the Bulls front office staff by surprise, and Rosengard added his good relationship with Reinsdorf, who had simply told him it was time for a change. Rosengard's 3 years with the Bulls coincided with the arrival of MJ and an increase in ticket sales, corporate sales, and promotional nights.
That's an unfortunate way for him to go out because just as the Jordan train was starting to really gain all the momentum through those first 2.5 seasons, and then he's shown the door.
Rosengard actually spoke in the article about how much all of the figures are all up since he's been with the Bulls, but it also just so happened to coincide with the arrival of one Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Yeah, fair point.
Jordan tested out his sprained wrist sustained in the game versus Milwaukee in Bulls practice. Jordan said it was still sore, but he was also complimented by the fans' All-Star voting that showed they appreciated his style of play. Coming into their next game, the Bulls ranked number 1 in the NBA in defense, allowing 102.6 points per game, 22nd in scoring at 102.7, first in rebounding, and tied for first in turnovers.
Okay, that's some interesting stuff there. To be number 1 in defense is quite extraordinary, really. Obviously, I'm not surprised about the rebounding stats there, and not surprised about the turnovers actually either, so yeah.
Do you think that if they were ranked number 1 overall in defense, that their record might have been a little better too?
Definitely a good point.
At 20-17 on January 23rd, they didn't record their 20th win the season before until February 22nd.
I suppose Jordan was sitting on the pine at this stage back in NB86, still another month or so away. 8 NBA games were played on January 23rd. The high man across all games was Larry Joe Bird, who died up a then season-high 40 points, adding 12 rebounds, 5 assists and 2 steals, as Boston easily disposed of the up-and-coming Hawks from Atlanta 126-106 within the confines of Boston Garden. The win also clinched KC Jones his 4th straight trip to All-Star Weekend as coach of the Eastern Conference. I then stumbled upon this great line that appeared in the Statesman Journal, a newspaper out of Salem, Oregon. In the next day's recap, it says from KC, and I quote, "It makes me feel like King Tut. My wife will be able to go shopping in Seattle with all the credit cards." End quote. Good stuff there from KC. Looks like there's going to be a bit of a spending spree when they hit the confines of Seattle. Now, on this same date, mate, we're talking about the 23rd. Cleveland visited Chicago in front of 15,906 fans, and the Bulls had a big win, 117-96. They improved to 21-17. For the Bulls, Jordan had 35 points, 2 boards and 2 assists. Johnny Pax, 17 points and 12 assists. Charles Oakley, 15 points, 12 rebounds and 6 assists. Alston Turner, 12 points, and Brad Sellers, 10 points and 8 rebounds. For Cleveland, Ronnie Harper, 24 points, 6 boards and 9 assists, so a great game there from Harp. Jay New, Johnny Newman, 16 points. Brad Doherty, 12 points and 9 boards, and Mark West and Ben Poquette had 10 points each.
Michael Jordan scored 20 in the third term as the Bulls enjoyed a rare blowout win. The guys usually inciting the celebrations from the bench were leading them as Jordan sat the final 6 minutes as the reserves finished up. An 18-7 run at the start of the third term blew the game open, and John Macbeth Paxson completed his 4th turnoverless game in the last 7, in dishing out his 12 assists, and currently led the NBA in assist to turnover ratio.
Okay, that's fantastic on a few fronts. Great to see that the bench guys were getting some of the limelight as MJ sat. I love that. The fact that I've read out a couple of names we don't hear often in the box scores there as well. Elston Turner, one of them. It's good to hear they're getting some shine. And Johnny Pax on an absolute tear. That's awesome to have 12 assists and no turnovers. Good stuff, mate.
6th round draft pick, Air Petey, Peter Myers scored 6 points, 2 rebounds and a steal in garbage time in this game. Bob Sakamoto added, Pete's contagious enthusiasm makes him a team favourite as he spends Bulls practice with his nose buried in MJ's chest, then sits at the end of the bench during games.
Pizza Myers, hey? I like that. It's harking back to our previous episode there. Now returning to games on the 23rd, Portland, after a lacklustre first half, they were trailing 48-45 at home to Sacramento, reeled off 35 points in the third, then included a 20-2 run, leading to an 80-61 reversal of fortune after 3. To quote the Statesman Journal, Porter, a second-year point guard, had his finest NBA game with a team record 18 assists. So always great to get a Terry Porter mention there, one of my favourite players. Final score for that game was 109-89. Blazers were the winners. The win also snapped Portland's 3-game losing skid. On the 24th, at Denver, Alex English was a beast, dropping a season-high 46 points on the visiting Bucks. Coincidentally, Milwaukee drafted The Blade, one of the best nicknames going around, in 1976, where he'd actually played his first 2 NBA seasons. This was the 5th highest scoring game of Alex's career. 54 points versus Houston was his career high in November of 1985. Seattle were on the receiving end of a unique performance from Atlanta's Mr. Wilkins, who you could say was omnipresent.
Wow.
During a 41-point boom that he dropped on the Sonics in his Hawks 97-87 victory in Atlanta. The victory snapped the Hawks' 4-game losing skid, and as great as Dominic played, it wasn't close to his equal career high, which was 57 points, as we covered in episode 4 of this very series. Now, Chicago at Cleveland in the back-to-back of a home-and-home series in front of a great crowd, 20,103 at Richfield Coliseum, saw the Cavaliers demolish Chicago 114-84. Chicago dropped to 21-18. For the Bulls, Jordan had 27 points in 27 minutes, no rebounds, that'll be important in just a moment, 1 assist and 1 steal. Gene Banks, 10 points and 6 boards, and Earl the 12 Curitan had 8 points and 6 rebounds. For Cleveland, Phil Hubbard had 23 points and 9 rebounds, so a great game from him. Ronnie Harper, 22 points. Johnny Newman, 19, and Brad Doherty, 16 points. For MJ, that was just the first of 8 games in his career where he did not register a single rebound. Thank you to Basketball Reference for those great stats. This was the earliest game of his career in which that happened. I think we may have referenced that in a previous episode of the series, but quite a startling statistic.
What a difference 24 hours can make. The Bulls went from blowing the Cavs out in Chicago to their worst loss of the season in front of the biggest crowd at Richfield for the year. John Paxson wondered if the Celtics were in town as they pulled into the Coliseum as throngs of fans waited in sub-zero temperatures to see Michael Jordan. Dave Corzine even considered Jordan's drawing power. I did know MJ was an artist myself. He considered that it was actually a disadvantage for the Bulls as the home teams get up to play them in front of a sellout crowd.
He makes a good point, Dave. And I'm glad that you went with the artist gag, because had you not, there's a 97% chance I would have probably done it myself.
You've taught me well.
Thank you.
4 Bulls turnovers in the first 4 minutes got the Cavs out to a 14-2 start, and Paxson banged knees with old Mother Hubbard, sending him limping to the bench. Cleveland led 32-16 after 1, and a 15-1 run to start the third term had Coach Collins sending his starters to the bench in place of the reserves, who then went 6 minutes without a basket as Cleveland extended to a 69-40 lead.
Oh, wow.
Usually taking the starters out of a blowout like that and bringing in the reserves can inspire something of a comeback.
Yeah. That's rather insipid, unfortunately, isn't it? Now, the only other game on this date, January 25, featured the rivals Philadelphia at Boston. However, the Celtics won comfortably 111-96 behind 30 points from Kevin McHale. The Boston Strangler, a.k.a. Andrew Toney, top scored for the 76ers with 21 points, but at least on this occasion, didn't make any kills. The Celtics moved to 30-11 following the win, and the 76ers dropped to 23-18.
On the 26th, Bob Sakamoto detailed the personal makeup of the guys. Don't say anything about them wearing makeup, please.
If I did, it'd just be cosmetic.
Cosmetic. and how it allowed them to not rock the boat and keep a close-knit, cohesive team. Pizza Myers, Granville Waiters and Mike Brown have all been used sparingly this season, and Myers was given a hypothetical choice by the coaching staff at the start of the season. The team wins and you sit a lot, the team loses and you play a lot.
Wow.
Myers, while challenged by the concept of little playing time, chose to sit a lot because he wants to win.
An uncomfortable choice that I had to make, but for the sake of the team, he'll take the W's, I guess. Now, when you say Mike Brown, you're talking about great friend of the show, Mike Brown, aren't you? Episode 62?
That was remiss of me to not mention that.
As implied, of course.
Speaking of the bench, in a cool NB87 tidbit, this was the first season that the team had not gone with the traditional introduction of the entire team at the first home game of the season. The bench created their own huddle in a show of pulling together as a unit. That doesn't sound very good.
That is an unusual way to start a new season. Wow. The crowd got more than they bargained for.
Yeah. Coach Collins praised the bench group and also made mention of how an unsettled bench can tear a team apart.
That is definitely a cool tidbit. Let's just quickly head on over to basketballreference.com. The first game of the 86-87 season at home versus San Antonio on November 4, 86. So that game does not exist in this dojo, does it? Sorry, it's a Karate Kid. This game does not exist in trading circles. I know that for a fact. So that would be a great one to get. Pre-game, we get to see the Bulls bench in that show of unity. So great find there, mate. Love that sort of stuff. Thanks for going into depth there. Now, there were 4 games on this date, January 26. 2 of them went to overtime. And for mine, the pick of the bunch was Denver's trip to Portland, where the Trailblazers prevailed 145 to 141 in overtime. In a losing effort, Fat Lever chalked up his league-leading 8th triple-double of the season with a stellar 36 points, which was a season high, 12 rebounds and 10 assist masterclass. The aforementioned Alex English added 28 points and 9 assists, and Blair Rasmussen, who hails from Oregon, mind you, was great with 24 points and 11 boards. For Portland, Kiki Vandeweghe had 35 points, and Steve Johnson, ex-Chicago Bull, 32 points, 10 rebounds and 8 assists. So some great stat lines there all around.
The Bulls were about to enter a tough stretch of games with back-to-back versus Boston, then Detroit, Philadelphia, followed by 3 weeks on the road.
Now that will be an interesting test for Chicago as they enter into the All-Star stretch and then beyond in February, mate.
Up first was a home-and-home against the Celtics and the original Big Three, along with the inside play of Parrish and McHale. Bird and Ainge had combined to hit 21 of 41 on threes in the Celtics' last 5 games.
That's some pretty big-time shooting, not just percentage-wise, but making 21 threes in the previous 5 games is quite good for this period of time.
And in other Bulls news, Steve Schoenwald was named VP of Marketing and Broadcasting, replacing the fired Dave Rosengard. Schoenwald went on to spend 28 years with the Bulls in various positions before retiring in 2015.
This was a great day for Philadelphia's Charles Barkley. Prior to the 76ers game at New York, he found out he'd be taking part in his first NBA All-Star game. He then took that confidence with him to MSG and tore apart the Knicks with 25 points, 23 rebounds, 7 assists and 7 steals. Philadelphia took the win 108 to 103, and Gerald Wilkins top scored for the Knicks with 31 points. So good effort there from Sir Charles and company. For what it's worth, Gerald Wilkins as well. Good effort from him there for the Knicks. Now, Boston at Chicago in front of 18,106 saw the Celtics hang on for a 105-97 win. Chicago dropped to 21-19. For Chicago, Jordan had 30 points, 5 rebounds and 6 assists. Johnny Pax, 25 points, and he added 7 assists. Dave Corzine had a great game, 12 points and 17 boards, so he was a monster on the glass. And speaking of, Charles Oakley, 11 points and 17 rebounds as well for him. For Boston, McHale had a great game, 30 points, 12 boards, 6 assists and 4 blocks. Larry Joe, 24 points and 14 rebounds, and Robert Parrish, 21 points, Dennis Johnson, 18. That was Paxson's season high point total, 25 points, 11 of 17 shooting.
Michael Jordan spent the day in bed, with the flu, I should add, as the valiant Bulls fell short against Boston. Chicago mounted a last-chance rush, cutting an 11-point Celtic lead to just 2 with 53 seconds to go. But as Dave Corzine put it, you double one All-Star and he passes it to the other All-Star that you just left open.
That's funny.
Yeah, perfect. This game was actually tied at 50 at the half.
Okay, I didn't know Jordan was crook going into this game, and he still had 35 and 6.
Jordan was touch and go with the flu before the game, but was forced to play when guard Elston Turner was ruled out with a left thigh contusion. MJ added post-game that he lacked energy down the stretch of this game. Jordan, not Elston Turner.
That recap is from the 28th of January. The individual high scorer across the 5 games on the NBA slate for January 28 was Seattle's Tom Chambers. He had 37 points and added 10 rebounds, as his Sonics were indeed super, pummeling the visiting LA Lakers 125-101. Chicago travelled to Boston on the 28th in front of 14,890. With this massive win, 132-103, the Celtics improved to 32-11. Chicago dropped to 21-20. For the Bulls, Jordan had 27 points, 4 rebounds and 4 assists. Mike Brown, 17 points. Gene Banks, 13 points. Dave Corzine had 13 points. And Charles Oakley, 11 rebounds and 9 assists. And for Boston, Bird had 26 points, 5 boards, 9 assists. Dennis Johnson had a great game with 26 points and 10 assists. Kevin McHale, 22 points. And Fred Roberts, 13 points and 8 rebounds. Speaking of Mike Brown, the new Washington Monument had a season-high 17 points that we just talked about.
Doug Collins is a guy who hates to lose, so this game must have been a nightmare for him, wrote Bob Sakamoto. It was over in the second quarter as Boston extended a 32-25 first quarter lead to 71-46 at the half.
Youch.
Collins added post-game that if Celtics coach KC Jones hadn't called the Dogs off, the Bulls might have lost by 60. Bob added that back-to-back versus Boston was too much for the Bulls. As they tried to reload their pop guns after the close loss in Chicago, the world champs unleashed their howitzers.
That's an absolute drubbing to lose by basically 30 points.
Robin Banks missed the team flight to Boston and was fined $150.
When you think about that in the context of today's money, you think $150, why even bother? But back then, I guess that's a decent chunk of change.
However, Banks said he was actually ran into a guardrail by a car who cut him off on the expressway. On his way out to O'Hare, River was left unscathed.
Oh, okay. That sounds a bit O'Hare-y, doesn't it? Yeah.
And in other Bulls news, Fred Cofield was released and returned to the CBA, and the Bulls signed guard Perry Young to a 10-day contract.
Was he Perry Young, or was he actually sort of 25 years old? Cleveland's Craig Ehlo, yet another great friend of the show, episode 16 of the show, had a then career-high 26 points. His only 20-plus point game of the year in this particular season, as the Cavaliers had a 102-91 home win over one of his future teams, the Atlanta Hawks, with whom he'd played from 93-94 through 95-96 season. That was January 29. Just to round things out, mate, let's have the players of the week. For January 18, it was Otis Thorpe of the Sacramento Kings, who averaged 23.8 points on almost 70% from the field, 11 rebounds and 2.5 assists a game, as his Kings went 2-2. For January 25, it was the Blade, Alex English of Denver, who had 32.7 points, 4.3 rebounds, 8.7 assists and 1 steal a contest, as his Nuggets went 3-0. Individual highs across the board. In points, we had Michael Jordan with 47 versus Philadelphia on the 17th of January. Artis Gilmore of San Antonio, at age 37 and 118 days, if you don't mind, thank you very much, Basketball Reference, pulled down 25 boards in San Antonio's game versus Utah, also on the 17th of January. And I'll add here that total rebounds have only been recorded since 83-84. However, that's his all-time career high as per Basketball Reference.
Wow.
So Artis rounded out his career in 1988 with Boston after commencing the season as a member of the Chicago Bulls. Last but not least, 3 guys all had 18 assists. Jeff Hornacek of Phoenix gave out 18 assists as his Phoenix Suns took on the Golden State Warriors on January 28. Terry Porter of Portland versus Sacramento also had 18 in a game against Sacramento on the 23rd of January, and Doc Rivers of Atlanta on the 15th of January also had 18 assists versus the Milwaukee Bucks. NBA standings, mate, through January 29. Our division leaders were, in the Atlantic, Boston were 32-11. In the Central, the Milwaukee Bucks were 28-18. In the Midwest, Dallas were 27-15. And in the Pacific, the LA Lakers were 33-10. The Chicago Bulls were 21-20. They went 3-5 in this span. And the LA Clippers were struggling mightily at 6-36 at this particular stage. That'll round out episode 7 of NB87. Thanks again, Aaron, for being a part of the show, mate, as always. Anything you'd like to add before we do put a bow on this bad boy?
Giddy up.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show. To quote the Statesman Journal, Porter, a second-year point guard, had his finest NBA game with a team record 18 assists. So always great to get a Terry Porter mention there, one of my favourite players. Second-year point guard at this stage who had his finest... No, what am I doing? I'm reading out the same quote. Yeah, I haven't been reading for very long, only 42 years